University of Chicago Public Policy Podcast.
Under orders from the Secretary of Defense, women can now try out for all combat jobs in all services.
We turn now to what some military officials call an enduring and pressing emergency, the rise in veteran suicides.
But more than a dozen current and former cadets have told CBS News they reported their sexual assaults to the Air Force Academy, only to then experience retaliation.
Don't ask, don't tell is history, but there's still plenty to talk about.
Hello and welcome back to Thank You for Your Service, a hard look at American civil-military affairs from the University of Chicago Public Policy Podcasts. I'm Nick Pereso.
And I'm Thomas Krasnation. Today, we're excited to bring you an interview we recorded last week with former Republican Congressman Tom Rooney. Congressman Rooney represented Florida's 16th Congressional District from 2009 to 2013, and he represented the 17th District from 2013 to 2019. During his time in Congress, he was on the House Intelligence Committee, the House Armed Services Committee, and the Committee on Agriculture. He decided not to pursue re-election in 2018, and he is now a fellow here at the University of Chicago Institute of Politics.
Prior to his political career, Congressman Rooney and his wife both served in the U.S. Army as judge advocates, military lawyers. He worked as a prosecutor at Fort Hood, Texas, and then taught constitutional and criminal law at West Point. We spoke with Congressman Rooney about his time in the Army, his experience serving as a member of Congress, and the reasons for having a military justice system separate from the civilian legal system. And, in light of his background as a former JAG and a Republican politician, we wanted to get his take on the president's recent decisions to pardon convicted or alleged war criminals. What are the implications for the military justice system and for the state of our country's politics?
Another thing we'll note, we had some technical difficulties during this recording, so our sound quality is a little bit different than normal. Thanks for your patience. Here's the interview.
Congressman Tom Rooney, thank you for joining us on Thank You for Your Service. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
So you've spent your time in Congress, but before that, you were in the Army. You served as a JAG, as an Army lawyer. What led to your decision to wanting to join the Army and serve as a lawyer there?
Well, it wasn't sort of in my in the cards of what I was thinking of doing at that point in my life. I was in law school at the University of Miami, and I was probably 27 or 28 years old when a Army recruiter came on campus, and I don't know why I went. I didn't think that was a possibility, but I don't know, maybe I didn't have that many options at that point. So I was just thinking of going to the state attorney's office back in my home county. And he just made this really good pitch, as he should, being a recruiter, that if I went into the state attorney's office, I would be doing DWIs and small stuff for years and years and years. And if I came into the Army, that I could potentially do like a murder case in my first or second year. So we weren't at war or anything like that. So it was just sort of at that point, it was kind of like a career move that I thought would be exciting. And, I wasn't married, didn't have kids, although I had a new girlfriend, and we started getting very serious. And I was just like, so what do you think about joining the Army? And, she wanted to be a real estate attorney on South Beach, which is totally different than being in the military. But somehow I convinced her to sign up with me, and we passed the bar, went on our honeymoon, got married, went on our honeymoon. And then not too long after that, we were in formation at 0530 Fort Lee, Virginia. I remember just like looking at her, and the sun hasn't even come up yet. It's freezing cold. It's just like, it feels so bad. Like, wearing the uniform, and she's like, at attention. But no, she was an incredible soldier, officer, great attorney. It actually fit her personality very well to help soldiers, and that's basically how it happened. I mean, there isn't anything bigger than that, other than the fact that I was named after a guy named Tommy Rooney, my dad's uncle, who was the youngest of his uncles, and he was killed on Guam in World War II, and he was in the Marine Corps, and I think he was 19, and so I always knew, it was never lost on me who I was named after. My dad, I think I was the only child. We have 6 brothers and sisters, and my mom named all of them except me, and I was named after him. So I have a son, Tommy, now, and I always make sure that he understands who he was named after. So that sort of was in there too. That I would be following in that legacy a little bit. I mean, he was a Marine Corps in World War II, which is a little different than being in the JAG Corps in peacetime. But
So a sense of service and a chance to get some really great experience in the courtroom, but really you could bring your girlfriend to work every day.
Well, actually, it's interesting because when we were picking our duty stations as a married couple, we had to pick a place that was big enough that we would never see each other in court for obvious, conflict reasons. So I think Fort Bragg was an option, and I wasn't really, wanting to jump out of airplanes at that point. Europe, and then like Fort Hood, because it's so big that there's multiple divisions. So I could be in First Cav, which I was, and she was at 3 Corps. I loved Fort Hood. Our son was born there. We used to go down to Austin all the time to listen to music and stuff. But in retrospect, maybe we should have gone to Europe just to get more touristy stuff in. But I really, really liked it.
And then after Fort Hood, you served as an instructor at West Point.
Right. Yeah. So, in the JAG Corps, as a direct commissionee, which we were, your obligation is 3 years, and then 5 years on inactive reserve status. So I thought we would do our 3 years. I would go home and have this on my resume. 9/11 happened 5 days after our first son was born, and Fort Hood, obviously, as I'm sure all installations went on lockdown, and everything just sort of changed. So my thoughts of getting a job, having this great resume, and also being able to serve in the Army during peacetime completely flipped on its head to where now it was much more a sense of service and much more a sense of, I'm part of the military. And, so I had, a chance to re-up one of my best friends who actually went on to be a congressman too, as a Democrat, was an instructor up at West Point. And he called me and he said, "Hey, are you getting out of the Army?" And I'm like, "I think we're going to get out. I mean, our time's coming up." And he goes, "Well, what would it take to keep you in?" I'm just like, "Well, there's a couple jobs out there that I'd be interested in." And, he said, "How about an instructor of law at West Point?" I'm like, "That's one of them." So I re-upped and we moved to New York. I got to having not gone to West Point, to walk around there as a captain and have these cadets saluting you on the way to class was really amazing experience. And much like the students here at the University of Chicago, I mean, these kids were way smarter than I was, but being able to work with them and interact with them on a daily basis was just a huge honor, incredible experience, getting to sort of learn about the Long Gray Line, and that all that history was awesome.
And what led to your decision to eventually leave the Army?
So my time at West Point, my obligation there was coming up, and like a lot of young officers at that sort of captain point, it's kind of like that seems to be the jump off point, or you're staying for 20, So I was pushing 5 years, and then I did actually really want to make major. I mean, for some reason that stuck in my mind as sort of being a really cool thing to achieve. But I think my wife wanted to go home, and, we had the 2 little kids at that point, and I don't know. I think it was one of those things where it was going to be, if I re-up again, I'm going to be in for 20. If I get out now, I'm not going to be so old that I'm competing against other lawyers that are getting out of law school, that are freshly out of law school, and I'm like this 32-year-old guy, and I'm trying to compete with them. I didn't feel like I was that old at that point that I could. Plus, I'd, be able to compete because of serving in the Army, and hopefully that was a plus, which it was. But I got to be honest with you, a lot of my friends that were in the JAG Corps that I was in their basic class are now making full-bird colonel, and I'm extremely jealous. And I still don't feel that old, and just to think that they're full birds right now is really impressive, and I have a lot of envy about that, So if I would have chose to stay in, it would have been great too.
So you left your tour at West Point. I believe you worked a couple of years in the private sector and then decided to get into politics.
Right. was in the Attorney General's office initially, and then I went to a private firm. In the middle there, I was working as the CEO of an orphanage in Palm Beach County that I was on the board of, and I don't know how that happened, but it was a very interesting and rewarding job. But then I went into private practice, and our congressman got into a little bit of trouble. And so it was kind of, one of those things where my kids were really young, and, I'd always had a little bit of a political bug. My first job out of college was working in the mailroom of our senator in Washington. So I definitely always had a little bit of a political bug, and I didn't know if it would ever be used, but it was kind of a carpe diem moment, to be honest with you. This guy got in trouble. He had to leave Congress. It was a Republican seat. I'm a Republican, and a Democrat beat the fill-in candidate who had to actually run under the old guy's name, because the ballots were already printed. So he lost, of course, and then he decided that he wasn't going to run again in 2 years. So it was completely wide open. So I'm just like, the hell with it. I mean, the worst that can happen is I run for Congress and lose, and I'm good with that. I can sort of tell my kids when they grow up, hey, your dad ran for Congress once upon a time and got shellacked, but but yeah, we end up winning.
So do you think your status as an Army veteran played into your campaign and your eventual election?
Absolutely. And I'm not crazy about people that wear that stuff on their sleeve, literally, because first of all, as a JAG, I always thought it was against the rules. You're not supposed to use your military status in that way. There's gray areas, like you can use it for historical purposes, like on my trifold little campaign thing. There was a picture of me and my wife in uniform in the back is almost like a resume thing, like, hey, this is some of the things that I did in my life. But the picture on the front was me standing in front of a tractor, because our district was very agricultural. But, I've always been very wary of like the campaign pictures that are like in uniform, like, hey, vote for me and you're voting for the Army. You're not supposed to do that. So, when we decided to run, obviously it was after 9/11, the war in Iraq and Afghanistan were heating up. So being on the campaign trail and being 35 or 6, I think at that point, running against two older statespeople, who, were secretly whispering to everybody that Rooney's too young and inexperienced, blah, blah, blah. But a lot of people were talking about Iraq and Afghanistan, and I sort of focused in on that as my issue to talk about in the campaign, rules of engagement, just what was going on, and why aren't you running for the state house instead of Congress? And I said, well, because, my background is in the military, which is dealt at the federal level. The state house deals with education and other important things that, I'm probably not the most qualified for. So it absolutely did help me. In many ways, like the way that I ran my campaign, the way that, I tried to keep things in a certain order and that kind of thing.
So shifting gears, back to your time as a JAG, many Americans' perceptions or understandings of the JAG Corps, of Judge Advocate Generals, comes from things they see on screen, like the short-lived CBS series The Code, or the TV show JAG, of course, A Few Good Men. What did your day-to-day job as a JAG really look like? How much did it line up with the glorified life of Tom Cruise?
Well, I got to be honest with you. I saw A Few Good Men not too long before I decided to join the JAG Corps, so it didn't hurt. But there's differences. Like in the Army, you're assigned, you're attached to a unit, and usually you start off doing legal assistance, which is whatever walks in the room with soldiers. Could be landlord, tenant. I bought a car and I can't afford it. Or, my wife's leaving me. I need a divorce. They do everything. And then you'll go into being a prosecutor for the commander of your unit. And then usually after that, you go into being a defense attorney, which is kind of affiliated with nobody. You're kind of autonomous, which is what they want. And then you can be a judge or, a staff judge advocate at like a division or something like that. In the Navy, like in A Few Good Men, from what I understand, and if there's Navy JAGs out there, I apologize if I'm screwing this up, but my brother was in the Marine Corps.